Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the first program in a series called Interfaith Dialogue. This program is centered around the similarities and differences between the great faiths of the world. Those predominantly being Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and of course we've got Jainism, we've got Buddhism, Hinduism, all the faiths that people believe in. Inshallah, through the coming weeks, we'll have cultured, eminent, world-renowned guests to discuss these different faiths with us and see where humanity can be coming together in name of faith. My first guest today is a person I've known for many years, somebody I work with in the Interfaith group in Manchester, Faith Leaders. This is a group convened by the Bishop of Manchester, and it has all the faiths combined in there. This person is a very eminent person in Manchester, a very well-known person, and his name is David. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
David is a founding member of the Muslim-Jewish Forum, and now he's heavily involved in the Council of Christians and Jews, both locally and nationally. So, David, once again, I'm so pleased that you're here today.
Nice to
and I hope that you'll find today interesting, and I know for a fact that your responses to my questions are going to be something that the viewers and myself are going to listen to and learn from.
I hope so.
So with that in mind, my first question to you is going to be, what work are the Council of Christians and Jews doing in the UK in view of what's happening in Gaza and Palestine to bring about peace or harmony or whatever the ethos is in the organisation?
Well, I should perhaps first explain that the Council of Christians and Jews is basically an organisation that brings together members of two of the great Abrahamic faiths, Judaism and Christianity, and we are predominantly concerned with the relationships between Christians and Jews in this country. That relationship is very special because, as many Christians would now acknowledge, that without Judaism, Christianity could not have ever been established.
Absolutely, absolutely. Same with Islam. Islam has its roots in Judaism and Christianity.
Yes.
So, the work that you're doing, as I mentioned before, because of Palestine-Israel war at the moment, the work that you're doing is obviously overshadowed by this event. So this is the forefront, let's say, the talking point. That's what's on people's minds at the moment. And my question to you was, is there anything that this forum is doing to alleviate this situation in any way?
It's a source of real anxiety for all our communities, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, people of all faiths and none. And it's very easy to take political positions and to say it's the fault of the Jews, or it's the fault of the Israelis, or it's the fault of the Palestinians, or Hamas, and so on. Those are essentially political discussions.
Yes.
But as people of faith, we are concerned about human life, about justice, about freedom for all. And that is what we try to work towards, to develop and build understanding, friendship and trust, to appreciate that as good a Jew as I may be, I don't possess all the answers, but nor does anybody else. And it requires a great deal of goodwill, a great deal of humility and patience. And I think the first thing is to realise that if we're going to venture opinions on these awesome matters, to actually not to further inflame passions, but actually to try and be a voice of reason, of moderation,
Yes.
and understanding, to bring communities together rather than to be the authors of further friction, distrust, even violence.
Yes. What you just said makes a lot of sense, but there are people in the UK, Europe, indeed the world, who are at the moment, there's an outcry against Jews, against what's happening. Is there a backlash, do you think, in the UK that you're aware of towards Jews because of this?
Well, what's happening in Israel and in Gaza is something which is happening to the people of that area and region. Those Jewish people in England aren't involved in it in any way.
Yes.
We care about it very deeply. But in fact, in July, just finished, was the second worst month in history for attacks on Jewish people and Jewish community that's ever been recorded.
In Gaza? In Israel?
No, here in this country.
In this country, right, okay.
There is a real backlash, which each time there is conflict there, then there is a mindless minority who don't bother to inquire, well, what do you think about this? They don't want to talk about it. They just give vent to hatred. It's just as unacceptable for Jewish people as was that horrible reaction when two men murdered a British soldier, Drummer Lee Rigby. There was a huge anti-Islamic backlash. Now that was absolutely intolerable. I spoke against that at the time. And this backlash that the Jewish community is suffering, not only in this country but in many other countries, in Europe especially, I believe it's very serious in France, for example, that seems to, each time the conflict flares up in or around Israel, then the Jewish communities suffer attacks. And it is a source of concern.
Let me give you an example. You mentioned Lee Rigby.
Yeah.
When that happened, a number of mosques were burned,
Yes.
firebombed. Just 2 weeks ago, there's a court case where this bigot, that's all I can call him, a bigot, was sent to prison because he'd been making bombs. And on his laptop or computer they found statements which say, this is for this mosque, I'm making this bomb for this mosque. Okay, I mean, that's the level of violence against Islam in the UK. I haven't heard of that kind of violence towards synagogues or Jews.
There have been arson attacks.
Yes.
I don't track all of them.
Yes.
I don't know what's happened recently, but I do know, I only saw the figures last night,
Yes.
that, as I say, that this is the second worst month there's ever been for attacks on Jewish people and Jewish community.
Okay.
So it is a source of concern for us for a variety of reasons.
Okay. You know, we're talking, as I said, about Gaza and Palestine predominantly today. Historically, one of the sort of bones of contention between the two nations has been the settlements, because the international community has given the Palestinians a certain area, and Jewish settlers are encroaching on those. That causes tension. Do you think these factors like these are the cause of what's happening today? Or do you think that's a very small proportion of the events there?
I actually don't think that, I think that's a complete red herring.
Okay.
And that might shock a lot of people.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is that before 1967, when Israelis lived only within the boundaries of the Green Line, already the idea was among Palestinian politicians to destroy Israel.
Yes.
It's just become another point of argument. It's not a matter of substance. There were historically, for hundreds of years, for example, small Jewish communities that lived in what is now Gaza.
Yes.
But when the Israelis withdrew from Gaza, those communities were forcibly removed by the army. Even those Jews who died and been buried there were removed, so that Gaza was entirely free for Palestinians to live in. And hopefully, if the Almighty blesses our peoples with peace, then I'm sure that the issue of settlements will be the least of our problems. That I'm sure will be resolved.
See, the problem stems from, it seems to be one-way traffic. If Palestinians were allowed to go and live in or settle in Israel as well, I don't think people would make a fuss about it. It seems to be one way. I think that's the bone of contention there.
Well, there are, I don't know what the demographics are, but certainly more than 1 million Israeli Arabs. They live in Israel, they're citizens of Israel, they have an Arab list, candidates for parliament, they're members or they're members of the Knesset, maybe ministers in the government. I don't know, I don't follow it to that level of detail. And they enjoy all the rights of other citizens. Israel is a genuinely pluralist, democratic country, and like in this country, criticise their elected government. Sometimes they do it a bit more forcefully than we're accustomed to in this country. And it's a lively place to live. But I think that the difficulty that we all have observing events from so far away is we don't actually see the encounter between Israelis, some of whom are Jewish, some of whom are Palestinian, Arab, some of whom are maybe Muslim or Christian. We don't actually see that happening on the ground. And they do live alongside one another, and they do have links, they do form friendships, they do get along. It is absolutely perfectly possible for Jews and Muslims and Christians and others to live in peace alongside one another. And it just seems to defy everybody's imagination to find the way to make that happen.
This is obviously the bone of this is the $64 million question. As you just said, it is possible for different nations to live together. We do it here. You know,
Yes.
there's a hot pot of nations here. There must be, 64 different nations living together in the UK, at least 64. If there's 64 countries in the world, there's 64 nations here. You know, whatever the number of countries that are in the world, we've got people from those countries living in the UK quite harmoniously. We have our problems, we have our scuffles, we have our differences, but ultimately we have our similarities as well. If we can do it in Europe, why can't it be done in the Middle East?
History, culture, sense of identity, there's all kinds of reasons. And sometimes these problems take literally hundreds of years to solve. And that's the problem with being human. We just haven't got that degree of wisdom and intelligence. If you look at what happened in this country, there was this conflict in Northern Ireland with the Irish nationalist movement, which went on for hundreds of years. And there are politicians alive today who said they never believed it would ever be possible to resolve
Yes.
that conflict, and yet that conflict is not completely settled, but we've achieved far more than most people
Ever
20
yes.
years ago
Yes.
ever believed
Yes,
could have been achieved.
I agree with that. I do absolutely agree with that.
And
yes.
I actually think that if those of us who live a long way away were to just help those people who are living on the ground and want to talk and engage with one another, we actually might be able to help them to find a way forward. I met a couple of Christians who had visited southern Israel, and there they met a lady who was in regular mobile phone contact with Palestinians living in Gaza. There are conversations that are taking place. I don't know what those conversations are, but they are talking to one another. And the more that they can talk, the more that we can help them to talk, then the brighter the prospect is ultimately for them finding a way to live alongside one another in peace.
On that note, David, let's take a short break. We'll come back and start with the calls.
Okay.
We're coming back to you in just a few moments.